Ozai is one of the more interesting changes that the new Netflix Avatar The Last Airbender adaptation made. Ozai in the original is one of the most overtly villainous characters in the show. He is the quote unquote big bad, and some fans have found him relatively uninteresting because of that fact. I would not say I'm one of them necessarily. Certainly, as a general tendency, I prefer complicated characters to simplistic characters. But I do not think we need a more morally conflicted Ozai, for instance. He exists in the show primarily for the image he has in Zuko's mind. Zuko views him as this stern but ultimately benevolent and well-meaning father who is a safe and strong and considerate protector of his nation, who deeply cares for the honor and glory of his nation, and is waging a just war to ensure the prosperity of that nation. He ultimately believes Ozai's narrative about the world and his narrative about himself, Zuko. He believes that he is weak, that he has no courage or determination, that he is ultimately frail and an unworthy heir to his father. And ultimately, he fully believes in his own fault. He believes that he was wrong and he was banished because he was wrong. He values his father, and he values the position of honor and notoriety and privilege that the throne is. Ozai holds that throne, and Zuko, before his exile, was the next in line. He does not value the throne simply because he wants to be the prince, and this is something I think the Netflix show kind of aired in a little. He wants his place as the crown prince back because of the reputation of that position, because it confers a sense of importance, because it is surrounded with this sense of righteousness and glory and renown. Zuko deeply believes in the basic goodness of the Fire Nation as a country and of his father, both as the leader and the guiding beacon and moral center of that country, and as his father, as this figure who embodies the moral and just and correct values that he, Zuko, should seek to embody. Ultimately, Zuko's journey leads him to realize that his reverence for his father was wrong. That the true thing that was dishonorable was committing vile acts that he feels conflicted about in his heart. Zuko is by nature a caring and considerate person. in order to attain the approval and approbation of his father, and the approval and approbation of the Fire Nation as conveyed by his reaffirmation as the Crown Prince. He ultimately rejects those external systems of valuation in favor of his own personal internal system of valuation, a sense of morality that is not only not based on the standards and mores of the Fire Nation monarchy, but is fundamentally opposed to them. So this is why Ozai is interesting to me. Less because of who he is and more because of who he is for Zuko. The decision to make Ozai a more interesting character in the adaptation, or at least try to do so, is not a bad decision necessarily, and I think it's mostly well done. Daniel Day Kim fundamentally lends a different kind of air to Ozai. Before this Netflix live-action adaptation, he voiced characters like General Fong in episode 201, The Avatar State, in Avatar The Last Airbender, and Hiroshi Sato, Asami's father in The Legend of Korra. This Ozai is still quite menacing, but he uses his power and his disturbing authority and psychological power over his children in different ways. The scene where Zuko is burned and exiled, which takes place in episode 106, Masks, in the live action, and episode 112, The Storm, in the original, demonstrates this difference quite well. In the original, Zuko speaks out abruptly against his father's war room, where a general devilishly, sneeringly suggests using a specific group of soldiers as a sacrifice for the military benefit of the Fire Nation. Zuko finds this unhumane, and he challenges the general, leading to a showdown with Ozai. And Zuko, who venerates his father, who idealizes his father to such a degree that he does not want to even be seen to object to his father as a person, cannot fight. He refuses, and this refusal to fight infuriates Ozai more, leading to Ozai furiously deciding to burn his face and then immediately exile him. The scene works differently in the Netflix version, and these differences, while they do not portray Ozai in a less villainous light, necessarily, they do make the sheer severity and the sheer visceral cruelty of what he does to Zuko less immediate. Zuko decides to fight him. Ozai overpowers him after they fight for a bit, and then Ozai takes the opportunity to cruelly burn his son's face. Then, while Zuko is recovering, Ozai basically asks him if he has learned his lesson, if he has adopted Ozai's way of thinking. When Zuko reiterates his prior ideological commitment, Only then does Ozai become disgusted enough, it seems, to banish him. Small details like that matter. The basic content of the scenes in both versions is the same. But Ozai in the original seems monstrously cruel. To look into the terrified face of his young son who refuses, out of sheer veneration for his father and sheer terror at having offended him, to even fight, and then burns his face and immediately exiles him. The Ozai in the Netflix version is fundamentally attempting to instill a certain worldview and a certain ideology into Zuko. And he gives Zuko the opportunity to accept this way of thinking that is based around power and domination and forcefulness. Ozai in the original is so disgusted by Zuko, so disgusted by his sheer refusal to even fight, that he burns him out of sheer malice. Both instances are wrong, of course, but they fundamentally delineate the difference between these two characters. Ozai in the new version, like General Fong and like Hiroshi Sato, is an extremist. He is a bit wildly chaotic, a bit mentally unstable, and extremely narcissistic, and yet he is still committed to a basic worldview, a basic ideological project, and he fundamentally sees his acts of cruelty towards certain people as a way of trying to convince them of the rightfulness of his specific ideology when more peaceful methods fail. This is true of Ozai in the new version, just as it is true of Hiroshi, and just as it is true to a lesser extent of General Fong. There is a similarity between all these characters, besides the fact that they are all played by the same actor. He does not display the same kind of wanton cruelty as Ozai does. That is not calculated. That's not scheming. That's just viscerally disdainful and scornful. This is both good and bad. It's good because it makes a more contemplative Ozai. This is a person whom one can imagine seeing into his psyche and seeing all these dreads and uncertainties and fears. One can understand, or at least get an implication of the basic psychology and the basic thought process behind his actions, and understand that it comes from a place that is manipulative, and it is rather domineering and deleterious to the emotional and psychological health and welfare of Zuko and Azula, and yet it fundamentally is, at least in his mind, justified. The Ozai in the original show does not care about those kinds of justifications. He displays the unvarnished, unadulterated arrogance of someone who has never had to change his attitudes or his worldview. Someone whose grasping ambition has never been genuinely checked. This is an attitude he passes on to Azula in the original show. She views herself as committing these acts of cruelty and violent aggression toward those she considers her enemies, or even not up to her lofty, domineering standards, simply because it is right and proper, because she is a brilliant, thoughtful, daring princess of the Fire Nation, and the world should bow to her. That attitude is simply an exaggeration of Ozai's attitude. This complete unwillingness to even consider justifying yourself. It's a fundamentally different attitude from Ozai in the show. To a certain extent, making Ozai more interesting, while it is a good choice, lessens the sheer perversity of Zuko so doggedly attempting to justify himself to a father who is clearly and boldly, from the portrayal in the show, not caring for him, not considerate of him. And everyone can see this, even someone like Zhao. He is the only one who can't, because he is so fundamentally committed to this worldview of regaining his father's acceptance and thus everything being all right. Here, Ozai is more subtle and more elegant in his attempt to gain the allegiances of his children, or at least prevent them from going against him, while also condemning them when they split from his iron-fisted will. It's a different character. It's a more subtle character. Whether or not that's a better character is debatable. Would Iago in Otello be better if he was less overtly malevolent? If the intensity of his scheming was less obvious and apparent? Someone like William Hazlitt, the great critic, says no. He says that there is value in seeing this symbolic embodiment of pure malice, of scheming for the sake of scheming, and in that scheming, manipulating the minds of more normal and considerate people. There is value in that kind of characterization, and that's perhaps what we see in Ozai. But of all the changes to make to the original, making Ozai more of a complicated character, at least making his scheming and his manipulations slightly more subtle and sophisticated, is not a bad decision. And as the show continues, I'm interested to see in what direction they take his character. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my Patreon if you can. You want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Keep watching Avatar, both versions, but especially the original. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.